I waited for her apology in silence. Not for days, not for weeks, but for a long time. I didn't wait loudly. I didn't ask questions. I didn't bring it up again and again. I just waited quietly, thinking maybe she needed time. Maybe she didn't understand yet how deeply she had hurt me. That night still lives in my mind like a soft ache that never fully leaves. We were sitting in the living room, the lights low, the house unusually calm. My daughter-in-law sat across from me, her phone in her hands, her attention somewhere far away from my presence. I said something simple, something small. I only asked if she could speak kindly when she was upset. She looked at me for a moment, just a moment, and then she said, "You're too sensitive. You should learn to ignore things." Her words were calm, but they landed heavy. I smiled without meaning to, a small smile, the kind you use to hide pain. Inside, something folded in on itself. I wanted to say more. I wanted to explain, but my voice stayed quiet, like it didn't belong to me anymore. So I said nothing. That was the moment I started waiting for her to come back and say, "I didn't mean it like that." Waiting for her to notice the distance in my eyes. Waiting for her to understand. Days passed, then weeks. Life continued around me. Meals were cooked, laundry was folded, prayers were whispered. And yet something was missing. Every time I heard footsteps behind me, a part of my heart hoped it would be her voice calling my name, gently this time. But the apology never came. What came instead was silence, polite words, normal days that felt strangely empty. And still, I stayed kind. I stayed calm. I stayed present. People might ask why. Why did I forgive without hearing the words I deserved? The truth is simple. Forgiveness came before the apology because my heart was tired of carrying the weight. This is the story of waiting quietly, of being hurt without noise, of choosing peace when pride begged for distance, and of learning that sometimes forgiveness is not something we receive. It is something we give, even when no one asks. Before everything became heavy, our home was a gentle place. Not perfect, not always quiet, but warm in a way that felt safe. I am a mother of one son, just one. From the day he was born, my world narrowed and settled around him. I raised him carefully, like you hold something fragile but precious. I taught him manners, patience, and kindness, or at least I believed I did. When he grew up and married, I welcomed his wife with an open heart. I truly did. I remember the first day she came to our home as a bride. Her eyes were full of nerves and hope. I smiled at her and said, "This is your home now. Never feel like a guest." I meant every word. At first, things were gentle between us. We talked in the kitchen. We shared tea in the afternoons. I tried to help without interfering. I stepped back when she needed space. I stepped forward when she needed support. I knew my role had changed. I was no longer the center of my son's life, and I accepted that quietly. I understood that marriage brings new winds into the house. So I adjusted myself. I changed small habits. I softened my voice more than before. I swallowed words when I felt misunderstood. I told myself, this is how peace is kept. My son watched us from a distance. He worked long hours.
He trusted that the women he loved would work things out on their own. And most days we did. Or at least we smiled like we did. Inside me, though, lived the need to feel respected. Not praised, not admired, just seen. I never wanted control. I only wanted kindness. I cooked meals the way she liked. I kept quiet during disagreements. I learned what made her comfortable and tried to follow it. When she corrected me, I nodded. When she sighed, I stepped back. People often say older women are rigid. I tried my best not to be. Still, there were moments when I felt invisible. Small moments, like when my advice was brushed aside without a word, or when decisions were made in front of me about the house I spent years building. I ignored these moments, or at least I pretended to. I told myself this was normal, that adjustment takes time, that patience is love in practice. At night, I would lie in bed and replay the day, not angrily, just gently questioning myself. Did I say too much? Did I step over a line? I always found a way to blame myself. One evening, while washing dishes, she said casually, "Things are easier when I do them my way." Her voice wasn't harsh, just firm. I nodded again. My hands kept moving under the running water. The sound of it drowned the small ache in my chest. I didn't talk about it to anyone. Not my sisters, not my neighbors, not even my son. I believed silence was protection, that speaking up would only create cracks. I believed that love meant enduring quietly. I didn't know then that these small moments were not disappearing. They were settling, gathering, waiting to become heavier.
And I didn't know that the apology I would one day wait for had already begun to drift farther away. The changes did not arrive all at once. They came softly, almost politely. At first, it was just small moments that felt slightly off, like furniture moved a few inches from where it used to be. Nothing obvious, nothing loud, just enough to make my heart feel unsettled. She began correcting me more often, not in a sharp way, just gentle reminders, spoken with a quiet firmness that made me feel small. "Please don't do it that way. I prefer if this stays here." "It's fine, I'll handle it." Each sentence was simple. Each one carried a message I tried not to hear. I told myself she was stressed, that life was heavy, that young women carry worries they don't always know how to express. So I stayed still. I stayed agreeable. But slowly, my place in the house began to shrink. I noticed it during meals first. Conversations happened around me, not with me. Plans were made without asking my thoughts. When I spoke, the room sometimes fell quiet, not in respect, but in discomfort. So I spoke less. I started eating faster, quietly returning my plate to the sink while they continued talking at the table. I found comfort in routine, cleaning, folding laundry, tidying rooms. No one noticed unless something was missing. Work gave me purpose. Silence gave me shelter. My son remained kind but distant. He loved his family. He trusted that everything was fine because no one complained, and I didn't want to be the woman who complained. One afternoon, I suggested something small, a change in how we stored food, something that made sense to me after years of managing a household. She paused, sighed lightly, and said, "Ami, things are different now."
different.
The word stayed with me longer than it should have. I nodded again. I always nodded. That evening, I stood alone in the kitchen, watching my reflection in the glass cabinet. I looked older than I remembered, tired but still trying to appear strong. I wondered how someone could feel so out of place inside walls that once echoed with her own laughter. Another day, another moment. She spoke to me sharply in front of my son. Not loud, not disrespectful in words, just dismissive. Please, don't interfere. I felt something tighten inside my chest. I waited for him to say something, anything. He didn't. He avoided eye contact. He chose peace over truth. I understood his silence, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. From that day on, I started walking carefully around her moods. I listened more closely to her tone than her words. I could tell by the way she set her bag down whether it was a good day or not. I learned to disappear during bad days. I stayed in my room longer. I kept my thoughts tucked away. I reminded myself again and again that patience is a kind of love. But the thing about patience is that when it goes unnoticed, it starts to feel like weakness. One night, she snapped at me over something simple, a cup placed in the wrong cabinet. Her voice rose just enough to sting. I didn't respond. I picked up the cup. I moved it. But something shifted. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. The house was silent. My heart was not. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if my silence had taught her that my feelings did not matter. The thought scared me. In the days that followed, the air between us stayed tense. Not angry, just cold. Our conversations became practical, necessary, empty. Good morning. Dinner is ready. I'll be late today. Nothing more. I missed the warmth we once shared. I missed feeling useful without feeling invisible. I missed being spoken to as a person, not a problem quietly managed. I waited for her to notice, to soften, to ask if something was wrong. She didn't. Instead, she grew more confident in her distance. One evening, she told me directly, "It's better if you don't get involved anymore." Her words were calm, final, delivered like a solution. I smiled again, that same empty smile I had practiced too well. I said, "Of course." But inside, something cracked quietly. That was when I realized I was no longer waiting for understanding. I was waiting for an apology. And I didn't know yet how long the waiting would last. The turning point did not come with shouting. It did not arrive during an argument or a dramatic fight. It came quietly, almost gently, which made it hurt even more. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky stays gray all day and the house feels smaller because of it. I was sitting in the living room, folding clothes that weren't really mine. Shirts I didn't wear, towels I didn't use. I folded them carefully anyway, like they mattered. She walked in and stood near the doorway. I looked up automatically, my heart doing that small jump it had learned to do whenever she came close. Her face was calm, controlled. She said my name once, Ma. I looked at her fully then. I waited. She took a breath and said, "I think it's time we set some boundaries." The word felt sharp in my ears. Boundaries. She continued speaking, slowly, carefully choosing words the way people do when they want to sound reasonable. She talked about space, about independence, about how it was hard to run a home with too many opinions. I listened.
I really did. I nodded in the right places. I kept my face still. Then she said something that changed everything. She said, "You should stop expecting things from us. It only creates problems." Something inside me went very quiet. I realized then that she knew I was waiting for understanding, waiting for kindness, waiting for an apology. And she was telling me I should stop. I wanted to speak. My mouth opened, then closed again. I couldn't find words that wouldn't sound like begging. So I asked one small question instead. "I didn't mean to cause pain," I said softly. "Did I?" She paused, just for a second. And then she said, "I don't think that's the point." That was it. Not denial, not acceptance, just dismissal. I felt invisible in the clearest way I had ever felt in my life. That evening, I went to my room early. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall for a long time. I didn't cry. I was past that stage. Crying needs hope. What I felt was something heavier. I thought about all the times I stayed quiet, all the times I adjusted myself, all the times I forgave without being asked. I realized something then that took my breath away. My silence had taught her she didn't owe me anything. The apology I was waiting for was not coming. That night, my son came into my room. He sat beside me, awkward and unsure. He asked if I was okay. I told him I was tired. He nodded, relieved, and left. I understood then why apologies matter. They don't fix everything, but they acknowledge pain. Without that acknowledgement, pain becomes loneliness. Days followed that felt strange. Not tense, just empty. I moved through the house like a guest again. Careful, polite, distant. I stopped hoping. And strangely, that gave me clarity. One morning, while sweeping the floor, I whispered to myself, "If the apology never comes, what happens to me?" That question changed me more than any arguments ever could. I realized I had two choices: keep waiting and slowly disappear, or forgive without words and reclaim my peace. Forgiveness did not come suddenly. It wasn't noble or graceful. It was tired, quiet, practical. I forgave because my heart could not carry resentment anymore. But forgiving did not mean forgetting. It meant seeing clearly. The turning point was not what she said, it was what I finally understood. The days after that evening felt different, though not loud or sudden. There was no dramatic confrontation, no grand apology handed over on a silver tray. Instead, it was small gestures, quiet acknowledgments, and moments where I finally felt seen. I began noticing her again, not just as someone who had hurt me, but as a human being carrying her own burdens. I watched the lines on her face soften, the corners of her eyes lift when she spoke gently. It reminded me that forgiveness was not about forgetting what had happened, but about understanding that people often act from fear, pain, or their own struggles. One afternoon, she came into the kitchen while I was washing dishes. She stood silently beside me for a moment, hands resting on the counter. I didn't speak. I didn't ask for an apology. I just felt her presence, and somehow it was enough. Then she said softly, almost in a whisper, "I know I hurt you. I wish I had said it sooner." My heart tightened, not with anger or resentment, but with relief. Years of quiet tension, of unspoken words, seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. And now the air felt lighter. I smiled at her, just a small, simple smile. She didn't need to kneel, beg, or cry. She only needed to acknowledge. From that moment on, our interactions began to shift. The sharpness that used to linger in our words softened. Conversations that felt impossible now arrived naturally, like the first gentle sunlight of morning after a stormy night. I discovered that she wasn't perfect, and neither was I. And yet, there was space for care, for recognition, for rebuilding what had frayed. I realized forgiveness is not a moment, it is a practice. It starts quietly, with letting go of small grudges, with noticing the humanity in someone you thought had wronged you. Each small act of understanding, sharing a cup of tea, a soft word, a gesture of kindness, became a stitch in the fabric of our slowly healing relationship. Sometimes I would catch her watching me, hesitating, uncertain if she could bridge the gap. And I would think, I don't need her to prove herself. I just need us to begin again. There were days when the weight of past hurt surfaced, when memories whispered like echoes from an old house. But I no longer felt trapped by them. The silence that used to choke our home became a space for reflection, for calm conversation, for listening. And in listening, we both began to understand the depth of what had been missed, the ways we had misunderstood each other, and the ways we could choose differently from now on. I learned that waiting for a sorry doesn't mean giving in. It doesn't mean being weak or submissive. Waiting in silence can be an act of quiet strength. It can be a choice to give someone the space to recognize their mistake, to grow, and to step toward reconciliation on their own terms. Forgiveness arrived, not with grand declarations, but in the subtleties of daily life, in the gentle way she poured tea, in the moments when she paused to truly listen, in the unspoken understanding that we had both been carrying burdens the other hadn't fully seen. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a softness in my heart, a sense that even though we could not erase the past, we could shape the future, one small, mindful, and caring moment at a time. Weeks passed, and the change between us was subtle but steady. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just quiet moments of shared understanding, small acts of care that spoke louder than any words could. I noticed how she lingered a little longer when we talked, how she offered help without being asked, how her eyes held warmth instead of avoidance. I began to see her in a new light, not just the person who had hurt me, but someone learning, stumbling, and trying to do better. And in seeing her, I also saw myself, stronger, more patient, and more compassionate than I had realized. I realized that forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it transforms it. It turns the weight of old wounds into lessons, into moments of growth, into a chance to rebuild what was broken. One evening, as the sun sat through the window, painting the room in soft gold, we sat together quietly. I didn't feel the need to bring up the past. The air was calm, the kind of calm that comes after storms have passed and hearts have begun to heal. She glanced at me and smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and I smiled back. In that moment, I understood something essential. Waiting for someone sorry is not about weakness or surrender. It is about giving space for honesty, for self-reflection, and for change. It is about recognizing that people are complicated, that mistakes happen, and that growth is a process. I also understood that forgiveness is a gift, not just to the one who caused pain, but to ourselves. By letting go of resentment, by opening our hearts again, we free ourselves from the chains of bitterness and allow love to return in quiet, gentle ways.
Sometimes the strongest act of love is not in raising your voice or confronting loudly. Sometimes it is in staying, in watching, in holding on with quiet strength, and trusting that hearts will find their way back. And so I waited. I waited for her sorry, not with anger, not with resentment, but with hope. And in that waiting, I found something unexpected: peace, understanding, and a heart wide open enough to let forgiveness come first. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the room glowed softly with the last light of the day. I took a deep breath and smiled quietly to myself. Life had taught me that healing begins in silence, in patience, and in the courage to forgive, not for others, but for our own hearts. And in that gentle ending, I knew we were beginning again, with compassion, with awareness, and with the quiet love that waits patiently to be seen.